Welcome back to the channel and to our outdoor hangout space, which also serves as our home's main entrance. Sadly, it's become a shadow of its former self due to years of neglect. So today, we're going to get started on the mission to transform this sun-beaten, worn-out area into a stunning hangout for us and our 5 pets. For hopefully under $5,000, because I think everyone's kind of on a budget these days. Imagine a space with refreshing shade, a beautiful refinished deck, vibrant landscaping, a sleek new deck railing, and to top it off, we'll add a secure fence to keep our dogs from wandering off, allowing us to leave them unattended for short periods of time to relax. What makes this project even more special is the history behind it. 8 years ago, we gave this area a complete makeover for our wedding as we had it at our home. It was a total eyesore, as you can see. Now we're doing it again and we can't wait to share this journey with you. Plus, we will be breaking down the budget later so you know exactly what it takes if you want to take on something similar yourself. So join us as we give this area a whole new life once again. As you just saw, this deck looked way worse than it does now, but that doesn't mean it looks good in any way. Let's start by replacing some of these boards that have aged the worst. And don't mind my outfits, the day before this we went floating down a river in some tubes and I got a little too much sun, which was a great idea before taking on a deck revamp. Working outside in this heat really brings me back though. When I was younger, most of my jobs revolved around heat. I had a job seal coating blacktop all day in the sun. Not long after, I moved on to pouring iron in a foundry, and then on to welding aluminum fire truck bodies. Back then I could handle the heat pretty well and it really didn't bother me much. So I have a ton of respect for anyone who works outside in the sun all day, every day. It's tough, hot work, and I tip my hat to all of you. This entire project was one of those projects where it was like, this will take a couple hours, and indeed it did not. Everything just took way longer than we expected. Taking these boards out was awful. I probably should have pressure washed the deck first to get the gunk out of the tip of the Torx head, which probably would have made taking the screws out a little easier. Also, there was a lot of screws that were like broke off or rusted through. And I probably should have bought twice as many boards to replace, but the nearest big box store is about an hour away, so it is what it is. One of the tricks that helped me out the most that I figured out later was take an old screw, drill it into the Torx head to get some of the gunk out, and then back out the screw. So between figuring out which boards to replace and actually replacing them, that took me like 3 hours. So on to cleaning the deck, as you want a nice clean surface before you paint it. This is just some general deck cleaner poison stuff from the big box store. We sprayed it on, scrubbed it off, and then gave the deck a quick pressure washing, and I think we did a pretty good job. And honestly, that part was way worse than painting the deck itself. So Jess is going to edge around the door and all that tight spaces where I can't really spray, and I'm going to figure out how to get this paint sprayer running. I bought this thing several years ago for like $100, and I don't use it often, but man, it does come in handy every time I need it. And I think getting the timing right was the hardest part about spraying the deck because I didn't want it to be super hot or super windy or rain in the future. So we finally found a good day to do it. So it's kind of one of those things where we finally had good weather and we just had to kind of act on it. We ended up going with the dark brown from Deck Makeover. It's supposed to last 10 years, but I highly doubt it. So we spent $300 on stain/paint and then another about $250 on random wood for like posts and deck boards. And then it took us about a half day to clean and scrub the deck and replace the boards, along with another half day to actually paint 2 coats on the deck. So now that we got the deck sprayed, I'm gonna move on to working on the fence over here for the dogs, and Jess is gonna continue to work on the deck. She's gonna touch up the spots between the cracks that we missed, along with like some of the edges over here. And the deck's still kind of tacky, so we're gonna take it easy on it before we start working on the rail. So I don't exactly love the idea of having a fence because it's kind of also an eyesore, but at the same time, we desperately need one to allow the dogs to kind of roam free and have their own free time on the deck without me hovering over them and rushing them to go potty when I need to get to work. And don't worry, we'll still be outside with the dogs and they still get plenty of walkies. At one point, this house had to have had some sort of brick house or building here at one point, and I think they just literally plowed it over and buried it. Because when I redid the landscaping the first time, I found hundreds of these red bricks. And just digging these posts, we found way more. I thought about finding a dirt auger I could rent or borrow from somebody, but honestly I'm glad I didn't because it would have been pretty useless because every hole had about 2 bricks or 3 rocks in it. And we've never put up this type of fence before, so we were learning along the way, but the hardest part was getting everything aligned and making sure all the measurements were on, and of course, mixing the cement. Not fun. I guess I should call it concrete, as I'm sure somebody will correct me. And during the entire fence setup build, we only had one issue, and it was technically the fence supplier's problem because I looked at the instructions and the gate said 48 inches on center, and it was indeed not 48 inches on center, it was 50. Luckily, we caught it before the concrete was cured, and all we did was waste one bag of concrete. It took us roughly one day to get everything lined up and most of the posts concreted in, and after a little bit of cleanup, it was on to putting in the fence panels. We checked out multiple fencing options at multiple big box stores, and this one was slightly cheaper than the rest, and they kind of all looked and felt the same. And this was kind of really the only option. I didn't really want to go with wood as it was still pretty expensive, and chain link just didn't look the best either. The dogs were absolutely like, what the heck? But I think in the end, they're absolutely going to love all the extra time outdoors they're going to get. And then we actually got a jump start on the landscaping before we even decided to make this a video, and we figured, what the heck, let's record it and see what happens. The first time we renovated this, we put down that weed barrier because obviously weeds can't go through that, and then we put rocks on top because we figured that would look nice. Well, we learned pretty quick if you don't keep up with it on a regular basis, it just kind of all grows together, and when you go to remove it, it's an absolute nightmare. So Jess kind of just dumped the excess rocks along our shop because it's just dirt over there, and then we decided we had to kind of both work on this because it was so awful just digging all these rocks out that were just fused together with roots and the weed barrier, and by far the worst part of the entire landscaping project. So the new plan was low maintenance, that we could just water and keep up with weeds, along with no weed barrier because it's just the worst. So after we got this all shoveled out, Jess kind of took charge of this whole project as she's the one with the eye and the plants and the green thumb, and I'm just here for heavy lifting. And our soil's very sandy here, so we needed some sort of good base, and Jess's dad offered us a bunch of free decomposted horse manure, which gave us a good starting point. And Jess picked out a variety of plants with mainly purple flowers to give it a nice beautiful look, and I continued to do the heavy lifting and spread our own manure, while Manny supervised, and she figured out where everything would live. It's also later in the season, so we were able to raid one of the local Walmarts, and their garden section was all on clearance, so we took the truck over there to load up on mulch and dirt. It's hard to appreciate the beauty of Jess's vision, as none of this stuff is actually probably going to bloom this year, and it also just went into the dirt, but it will look good, I promise. We also went with a natural mulch color, as I wasn't a huge fan of the darker ones, and honestly, it was just a little bit cheaper as well. And for your viewing pleasure, a quick shot of Manny living his best life. And now that all the posts are cemented in, let's go back to the fence. Overall install of the panels was pretty easy. It was just a bunch of self-tapping screws along with some bolts. And as we're mixing concrete, we'll give you a peek at our fire pit hangout area, which will be another project for an entirely different day, as that will just put us over budget and I just don't have the time right now. But look at that pile of bricks. Should we make something with them or toss them? I had a few concerns when starting the fence build. Was A, the angle of the slopes, which wasn't a big deal at all as the fences actually had some give to them, so it was pretty easy. But this top curve part I knew was going to be a pain in the butt, just because I didn't know how it would bend around the curve. So the fence for the most part is done. We waited to do this last part up here because of these angles, and I wasn't exactly sure how the posts would line up. So I actually assembled everything, and now I'm going to pour the concrete in now, because this way I'd be sure everything would line up and I wouldn't have to race the concrete or kind of guess on the angles of the posts. And this actually worked pretty good. This is how I would have done it again if I were to do it over, because there was really no guessing. I just put it together and then got it level and added concrete. Manny, being the escape artist he is, manages to fit through these dang fence posts. But after a few corrections, he seemed to leave it alone. And luckily, we got a bunch of this concrete for free a couple years ago. Some of it was hard, but most of it was good, so it saved us on the total budget. The fence came in at $1,400, and all the concrete was free. That includes the gates and everything else. And Menards also had their 10% rebate, so we also got a little bit off of that price. And now that the fence is complete, we need to landscape this little awkward section up here, just to keep the dogs off of it. And the same as before, it's all just sand and leftover stones, so we need to dig it out a little bit and put a little bit better of a base down. So in comes more horse manure, and for whatever reason, the dogs just absolutely love it up here, so hopefully the plants will keep them off this area. And since we brought new life into this area and added a lot more plants, we've had a lot more friends, like bees and snakes. But he keeps the mice and rodents away, so he's safe. I can't wait for these plants to grow in and evolve and take shape to the area. And for a quick breakdown, we got the manure for free, Jess spent about $300 on plants, and the mulch and extras we got on sale for $50. And now that the fence is complete and the bulk of the landscaping is done, let's move on to the railing. As you can see here, I went a super cheap route and just bought some random cable, but this just isn't up to code and it's just kind of looking cruddy over time. We will be replacing this with the new, more modern cable system, so step one is to remove all the old stuff along with all these posts. We're going to remove as many as we possibly can just because we're going to be drilling new holes in them. So any post that's not like cemented in is going to get replaced with a fresh new post. And some of these posts were from the original deck, so they just look super old and cruddy and weathered, so they needed to be replaced anyway. And this time around, we decided to add a little bit of support underneath the railing just to make everything a little more rigid and tie everything together. The boards I'm using are actually the railing I just ripped off the top. I just gave them a joiner and planer pass to clean them up so they look nice and fresh. And to tie everything together, we'll be using these little tiny head Power Pro screws. They actually work pretty good and you can hardly even see them once installed. And then we replaced every post but I think 3 or 4, and the ones that didn't get replaced, I just took these dowels, a little bit of wood glue, and pounded them in as far as they'd go. I didn't want to see any big ugly holes, and I also didn't want any of the old holes to interfere with the new cable railing. But we did buy new 2x6s for the top part, just because we wanted that to look nice and fresh and clean. We cut all the miters and then I cleaned them up with this old hand plane just to flatten everything out, because sanding would take forever in some of these areas. And here's a little trick I did to find the angles. I just overlapped them and then I marked them exactly where they intersect and drew a straight line across, as you can see, like this. And that gives you a pretty dang perfect angle. But being wood, it's going to expand and contract, and as these dry out, they're going to shrink, showing a gap in the future, but at least that gap will be even. It's just one of those attention to detail things that no one will notice but me, but it makes me feel a little bit better about it.
All right, so it's time to install the cable railing here. We have the Muzada Wood Advanced Black system here. Everything we need is in this little package here. I have to drill 176 holes, and it looks pretty easy. All the connectors are screw-in invisible connectors, but it's gonna be a tedious process. 176 holes. Let's get started.
And I'm sick of staring at these little dog fences, so let's get this thing rolling. And then per most codes, you should not be able to put a 4-inch ball between each slat or cable. So we went just under 4 inches, and that ended up being 8 cables per section. And then I ran out to the shop and quickly made this template on our laser, so I didn't have to find center or how far the spacing would have to be on each one. I just slapped this thing on there, marked it out, and I just went to the races with the drill. This took me about 15 minutes to make, and in the end it did save me a lot of time not having to measure each post. And as I got further along in the process, Jess was right behind me with a sander and a paintbrush, because painting around all these cables would have been an absolute nightmare. And now onto the cable system. It really wasn't that bad. You just measure in between the gap and then add about 3 inches and cut it to length. So I started out by cutting 1 to length and then just matching that length 7 more times. And then you crimp this little thing on the end with the provided crimper, and that holds everything together. And then it's essentially a threaded insert. You screw it in each side, and then you continue to screw both sides until it has the proper tension. And now that I was comfortable with how the system worked, I moved on to some of the more tricky areas. Our deck has this little jut out area, and I had to drill these at like a 45-degree angle, and I just wanted to understand how the system worked before I drilled a bunch of holes into these fresh new posts. Every transition gets the threaded insert, then any straight through post get these little black protective sleeves that I just pounded in with a dowel, and you'll never really see them. Most decks would be a lot easier because there's a lot more pass-through posts than transition posts, but ours has a lot of turns to it, so I ended up using a lot more threaded inserts than I did the regular pass-through sleeves. We have about 80 feet of decking, so I think to plan it out, drill the holes, and insert all the cables, it took me about a day and a half of work. And this is my biggest complaint to the whole system, is this little tool. It does its job and it's relatively easy to use, but after doing a bunch of them, my hands started getting sore. I think if it had longer handles and maybe some rubber coating on it, it would suck a little bit less. And as I got better at it, I just stopped measuring altogether. I would just insert one end, pull it through, and just eyeball about 3 inches. And then all you do is add the threaded hardware, add the little stainless steel insert, use the pneumatic pump to crimp the end, and you're good to go. And then Musada did provide us this system and tools, but I'll give you a quick product breakdown if you were to buy this yourself. All the connectors were $300, the wire was $200, the tools were about $125, and then miscellaneous hardware was about $250, coming in at $875 total. Which isn't really that bad. If you had a smaller, more normal deck, it would probably be a little less. And if you wanted to save even more money, you could skip these little black covers, which are essentially black washers that make it look nice and clean, but they cost $200.
And now on to the next step. This deck just gets beat by the sun, as you can see. So we need some type of shade. We were gonna go with like a sun sail kind of thing, but after some research, I just don't think that's the solution for us. So we found a gazebo at our local big box store that was about $1,000, and we didn't have the highest expectations for it because it's cheap, but it was a little more disappointing than expected. So let me show you it and how we're gonna fix it. Okay, so this is the premium cedar here. And as you can see, it's just like, it's not even laminated all the way through. They're hollow. The rest of it looks fine. It's a metal roof, so we're gonna just replace these beams with some ones I found locally. And here are the beams. They are pine and not cedar because the cedar ones were super expensive. So these were $30 each. I already cut them down to size and gave them a joiner pass on each side to smooth them out a little bit.
And just look at these new beams compared to these old beams. They're bigger and solid, so they should last a lot longer. We also added an extra 8 inches to give ourselves a little more height. Before this, I spent a couple hours jointing and planing these big giant beams, and it was one heck of a workout because they were pretty rough when we got them. And then it took us probably several hours to get to this point and like the frame of the structure standing.
So we got the structure up, and I'm really glad we went with the pine beams because this thing is pretty dang sturdy. And then we gotta let them dry out before we can actually stain them to get them to closely match these. And now I'm gonna go ahead and figure out the roof so we can actually get some shade for the dogs, and Jess is gonna continue to paint the rail.
And the only modifications we had to do to make these new beams work was redo the half flaps on these angled cross members that just provide extra support. And then in the sections that called for little bolts, I used 4-inch Torx screws, just to make everything nice and sturdy. We looked at a lot of gazebos from the price point of $500 to $1,000. We almost bought a metal one, but we really wanted to buy a wood one. I really wish we had more time because as a woodworker, I would absolutely love to build my own gazebo, but just the time and thought of going into planning everything and figuring out what I all needed, it just wasn't in the cards right now. So let's see how this thing holds up in Wisconsin winter. Hopefully it doesn't fail, but if it does, I guess we'll make a video on replacing it. The roof actually felt pretty nice. It took us about 3/4 of a day, so about 1 day total to assemble the gazebo. And I did reinforce it with some extra metal roof screws. I wanted to paint it to match the railings, but Jess said that defeats the purpose of having a wooden gazebo if you're just going to paint it. So she mixed some stain colors together and found one that actually matched pretty close. And for those of you who tried to match colors before, especially on different species of wood, you know it can be quite difficult, but I think it turned out pretty good. And then I went ahead and replaced some of these main support posts underneath the deck because they were looking rough. And I'm glad I did because this thing was only 2 feet in the ground and had no cement. Blocking off the front of the deck is really important to keep our animals from crawling underneath it. I remember one winter after shoveling off the deck, Manny, our little 12-pound potato, loved to pee on those piles, and then managed to explore under the deck while he was down there doing his business. After a minute or two, we realized we couldn't find Manny. It was cold and we started to panic. Given his short little legs in the deep snow in most of the yard, we knew he couldn't have gone far. We searched frantically until Jess found him stuck underneath the deck. Manny had crawled underneath but couldn't find his way out because we pushed the snow piles off the front of the deck and they tend to build up after a while. We quickly shoveled a little path for him to get out and it was all good. He probably didn't even know anything was going on. We definitely don't want that to happen again though. Additionally, we don't want any other rodents like rabbits or skunks making a home underneath there. Our dogs and cats love to run under the deck like it's some sort of fun little sandy game. By blocking it off, we'll keep them safe and prevent any more close calls. And there were still some gaps underneath the deck, so we decided to add this little rock wall where it's kind of too steep to mow anyway. So I just collected some rocks around the yard and then dumped some fast-setting Quikrete in there to hopefully hold it together. And of course, we found more bricks. We'll probably cascade the rock wall lower, but let's see how this one holds up first. And on to the finishing touches. We found these little trim skirts at Home Depot for a couple bucks each. They just seal the post off nicely. They hide any uneven cuts where the posts come through the deck, and there is still a tiny gap on top, but I'd rather be a nice even gap on top than a jagged cut mark on the bottom. And then we wanted to spruce up the railing even more, so Jess found these LED solar lights online that light up at night, and they work great. They were easy to install and they give off the right amount of light. They're not too bright or too dim. And you may remember this thing from the beginning of the video. This is actually the bar from our wedding. It looked a lot better then, and I've since taken wood from it, and it aged pretty poorly. So we're going to use most of its lumber to make something new. We used it to set things on from plants, the delivery drivers put packages on it, and Jess told me to make something slatted, and I whipped this thing together pretty quick, and I don't love it. It looks like it needs some doors, but it's cool to have something that's from our wedding still on our deck. And weeds. How do you guys deal with weeds? We hate spraying chemicals because of all the pets, but this year we kind of had to kind of get a hold of the weeds. And then we found this torch on Amazon, which I don't recommend doing near your home, which burns them to a crisp and actually works pretty good. And then there's this walkway. We didn't really know what to do with it, so we just kind of removed the gross plastic edging, dug out all the rocks we could, and we decided to just remove the overgrown rocks and just let the grass grow up to the walkway. I did my best to clean out as many rocks as I could, and then just got as much gunk off as possible. I then used those rocks to freshen up the areas that already had rocks where we need drainage, like along the deck or the house. We then used the leftover horse manure to fill in any of the low spots and gave it a quick reseeding so it would grow back as fast as possible. Ideally, we add some beautiful pavers to kind of redo this walkway, but those are just very expensive, and that's a different project. And what's a new deck build without a new grill/griddle? We haven't had a grill in a while, so we got this griddle on sale, this Blackstone, for $250. I've heard these were all the rage, so we finally caved and got one. So if you use one and you love it, let me know what to cook on it because I'm so excited to start using it. And it is officially Agnes approved. And then the back part of the garage is just overgrown and cruddy. I'm going to park the Blackstone here, so I'm just going to remove any excess dirt to kind of level it off a little bit and give me a nice spot for these pavers. These are just old pavers that we've had laying around. They're not the best looking or anything, but for now, they give me a nice place to park the griddle, whatever you call it. And as I said, there was just way too much dirt here and it was just rotting away that lower part of the garage, as you can see here. We do plan to redo the garage in spring, hopefully, but for now, this will keep it from rotting. And obviously it's not ideal, but until we take on the garage project and redo that in spring, this is just how it's gonna be. And then we'll just reseed the bare areas that don't have pavers. And just like that, the Blackstone has a little home for when we're not using it. And now we're gonna add some furniture, and then I'll pass this off to Jess to give you a final quick tour.
So to start off the tour, we would love to showcase this new railing that we put in. I love how sleek and modern it is. It was super easy and simple to install, and it just adds a nice classic touch. Then to move on to the deck, we chose to do a dark brown for the base and black for the railing. And while I love the colors and the aesthetic, I don't love how hot it gets on everybody's feet, so we had to add the rugs. And I also don't love how much it shows the dirt and the dust, and it seems to get pretty dirty pretty fast. And then moving on to my favorite part of the remodel, we have this gazebo, which really ties everything together. It creates a focal point and an area for everybody to hang out in. And I love that it creates shade for us because this is a south-facing area, so it was just beaming with sun before. Now this will help keep the deck lasting longer and create a space for us to all just enjoy. However, we had to add these beams to the kit that came with the gazebo. They were hollow and just not stable or sturdy. So that was an upgrade we made, along with adding lights inside of the gazebo and this furniture that we got last season on Black Friday. And then up here we have our fireplace seating area. Again, we didn't get to it because of time and money, but we will revamp that one day. So for the landscaping, I wanted it to be low maintenance and just be easy to take care of. I went with a simple, what I call cottage aesthetic. This will grow in. I want it to get really full and just have nice purple flowers, a little bit of greenery, keep it nice and easy. And finally, on to another thing that we didn't quite finish for this video, but we plan to finish this year yet, is a gate for the deck to keep all the animals in. We're going to make it so it matches the railing and it's going to be like saloon door style. So for the front of the deck, we closed it off and added some rocks so that the dogs couldn't get under there and get stuck. Now all that's left is to give it some time for my lilies to bounce back and get a little more lively since we had them bundled up when we were painting. So that is it for our video. Thank you so much for watching. This is one of the first videos we're doing in the DIY style, so let us know what you think in the comments.